Good afternoon, History Puffs. Welcome back to the show. I'm here with my friend Patrick. Now, Patrick, what goes together better than a good cigar and intelligent conversation?
I think the answer you're looking for is heaven.
Well, you got me there. All right, well, while we're getting ready for the show, let's cut them up. All right, Patrick, what are you smoking today?
Today, I will be smoking a Fat Bottom Betty from Deadwood Tobacco Company. It's a little bit of a sweeter and darker cigar, so I'm excited to try it. And what are you having today?
So I'm having the same thing. It's from Deadwood Tobacco. I always take the bands off my cigars. It's called the Leather Rose. It tastes chocolatey on the dry what's that called again?
The wrap?
Dry draw, yeah. So I'm excited to get smoking. And like you said, my favorite thing to light with is a Zippo. And Patrick forgot his lighter today, so he's bumming off me.
Gee, thanks for calling me out there.
All right, Patrick, what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to be talking about the development of Christianity throughout history and its impacts.
Absolutely. This is a topic that's really near and dear to a lot of us, because I was actually raised a Christian, and also it's the dominant religion in Western culture, and I thought you can't really go about your day-to-day life without talking about this, so...
Maybe throughout your day-to-day, but you can't have a historical conversation that doesn't involve it in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. Unless you're talking about a specific region, but anytime you get Eurocentric, then you're going to have to discuss it. So
my friend Patrick here is a history major, so he knows all those fancy terms like Eurocentric and all that. I just smoke cigars. So anyways, for the origins of Christianity, they are shrouded in mystery. And to explain them, we're going to go on our very first soapbox moment. Christianity has analogs to many other messianic religions that were coming up in the Mediterranean at the time. So, I'm going to try and get this going. Now, a messianic religion is basically a religion where a god comes down from heaven, dies, and then is resurrected by their followers. So there were lots of cults that came before Christianity that have the messianic trend. For example, we have Zoroastrianism, there was an Osiris cult in Egypt, a Romulus cult in Rome. They all involve a dying and rising god, and they all predate Christianity. The oldest one, which is actually the most interesting, is the Inanna cult in Mesopotamia. And, trying to get this guy going. The Inanna cult... they worshipped the first Messiah goddess. She was actually female, and what her deal was is she descended from heaven, was nailed to a tree and killed that way, and then she was risen again by her followers 3 days later, who brought her the food and water of life. So very similar. Again, this isn't conclusive evidence. It's just very interesting. And the theory is that the Jewish bandwagoning on this trend of messianic religions is Christianity. And the thing that made this sort of possible is psychedelic mushrooms. So there's strong evidence to show that psychedelic mushrooms caused this variant of Judaism to become Christianity. And the reason why we know this is because not only are mushrooms pictured in many early Christian paintings, but there's a specific mushroom called the Amanita muscaria mushroom that's very clearly pictured in a lot of these paintings. So the first one is Christ's entry into Jerusalem, and this is at the Saint Martin de Vic in France. There's mushrooms in the background on this one. You'll see it on the screen. And then the next one is less quaint, and that's the conversion of St. Eustace in the Chartres Cathedral in France. There's bright red mushrooms, and it has been known to have psychoactive effects. And actually, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the word that they use for Jesus translates to mushroom covered in semen, and the semen explains the white spots on the mushrooms. And then there are some other mushroom imageries that I'll put up on the screen, like God creates plants in the Canterbury Cathedral in England. But the plants are mushrooms. There's no other plants on the screen, on the painting, than mushrooms. And then lastly, this one's actually in Turkey, in the Ilana Valley, and it's the angel Gabriel holding a mushroom, and it's very clearly a red mushroom with white spots. So again, there's strong evidence to show that these guys were tripping balls while they were in the early days. So, but again, with a lot of these messianic cults, a lot of their stuff was not written down. It's shrouded in secrecy, so we really don't know how Christianity came about. But what we do know is that Christianity is one of the dominant religions in the world, and we're going to get into its early history right now. Soapbox moment, over.
I'm not entirely sure I agree with your assessment that we don't know what the origins of Christianity are. I think that the origins of Christianity are pretty well documented, given the fact that there are actual records of Jesus who is the Christian Messiah. There are recorded Roman documents who the Romans, they hated the Christians in the early days, and they weren't overly hostile towards Jewish people comparative to how they were with other cultures, but they also still didn't necessarily like Jewish people. But they actually have recorded documents of him, and so that's just something to consider. That I understand what you're saying, that there are definitely correlations, but I'm not entirely sure I would chalk up two to three of the world's great or major religions being caused by psychedelics.
Well, I'm not saying that Jesus didn't exist. I'm just saying that the exact origins of Christianity are uncertain, and where we're going to pick up on the show is it somehow came to be. And now we're going to go over the history of what came after Christianity came about. Mm-hmm. So one thing I want to start asking you about, Patrick, is the early church. So whatever the origins of the religion, doesn't matter. We're talking about the history of the religion itself. Those early Christians, they really believed what they believed. I mean, yes, my goodness. The persecution that followed if you were a Christian was just unholy, you know.
It was quite harrowing, to say the least.
So Emperor Nero of Rome, he would actually line his gardens with burning Christians back in the early days, and he was the first emperor. I think he was the emperor during Jesus' time on Earth.
Well, I know that the persecution of Christians, it was something that happened throughout their time up until Constantine, really, but it really picked up in the post-apostolic church, which is the church after Jesus' 12 apostles died. Whether or not you believe in Jesus himself or not, it's still documented that he did have 12 particular followers, for lack of a better term, and so they were the leaders of the early church, and so in that time after, that control transitioned to the bishops, and once they got control, that's whenever the persecutions of Christians really picked up. At one point, they were blamed by Nero, if I'm not mistaken. They were blamed for a fire that occurred throughout the city, and then that was one of their excuses as to why they persecuted Christians. They just absolutely slaughtered them. So
do you think they fought fire with fire, so to speak, and that's why they burned all the Christians?
I don't know. I would have to look into that more, but it is an interesting theory, to say the least.
Most certainly. So anyways, I mean, you know, we have our disagreements about the origins of Christianity, but one thing that we agree on is the tenacity and the faith of these early Christians. My goodness, you know, imagine if you were threatened with being burned to the stake for what you believe and you still believed it. That deserves respect, in my book.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things with early religions up until the modern period, really, is that religion was a much more prevalent part of people's lives, and so they were willing to die for it rather than convert. It wasn't up until, in my opinion, this is obviously just my opinion on the subject, but I think that it's fairly well backed up. It wasn't up until you got into having... It wasn't until after the Protestant Reformation that you really got to where people would convert for reasons other than they truly believed that. Okay. We can get into that a little bit more later on,
and we will get into that. There's actually quite a few instances of people converting for reasons other than faith in history that we'll get into.
Yeah.
Usually it's against their will, which we'll get into that. But we can definitely agree on the tenacity of early Christians. So the next big step in Christianity is Constantine.
So Constantine, what he did, what was important with him was that he first started learning about Christianity from his mother. And so...
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it was a priest or like a...
A priest definitely facilitated it further, but if I'm not mistaken, it also came... Like, his mother knew about it, and so he started learning about it from her, and then that role kind of transitioned to the priest.
Okay, so at that time, was it less persecutable to be a Christian because his mother was a Christian? You were saying, and actually,
well, I don't know if she was a Christian. Actually, I don't know that. I don't know. But if I remember correctly, she at least told him about Christianity.
Okay.
Because one of the things that Christianity does well, in my personal opinion, is that it teaches a few good fundamental things, which you can, like, a few good fundamental guidelines to live by. Whether or not you agree with Christianity as a whole or not, they do have the Ten Commandments. A lot of them are just good rules to live by in daily life.
Sure, love thy neighbor. I mean, can't go wrong with that, right?
Exactly.
But that being said, though, it's well documented that a lot of Constantine's followers were Christian. Mm-hmm. So why was it less persecutable by 300 AD?
I think it's just kind of what happens whenever you have a force try and move against an immovable object. One of the things that Christianity would not have spread the way that it had without Rome, because Rome built better roads than were around up until, and in my opinion, including today. There are Roman roads that still exist today. My money's that in 2,000 years there will be none of our roads left, but there will still be Roman roads.
That's a good point.
Because the Romans knew how to build things to last, and the important thing about those roads is that it provided the infrastructure that people needed in order to travel quickly and to travel from place to place without having to worry about getting lost. They were well guarded and well regulated, so you didn't have to worry as much about bandits, especially at the height of the Roman Empire, which was right around the time that Christianity was getting going.
That's a really good point. You're not going to spread Christianity without the roads. No, that's wow. I never thought about that. Okay, so do you mind if I go ahead and start the story of how Constantine became a Christian, and then I want you to take over when it comes to the battle, because everyone knows the battle's the best part. So what Constantine did... So what happened was Constantine actually had a dream where there was a cross lining the sky, and then there were the Latin words, en tutoi nika, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, which says, in this sign conquer. And actually that Roman PX sign is actually the one that he saw. And so the next day he went to go face the Gauls at the Battle of Milvian Bridge. Now, Patrick, do you want to take over? You know this better than I do.
So what happened at this battle was Constantine was outnumbered. Like, he was facing arguably insurmountable odds. And so he went into battle, and then the bridge actually collapsed beneath his enemies, killing large portions of them and their commander, if I'm not mistaken. And so that was one of the things that Constantine was like, yes, God, I understand. You are now my God, and this will be what I believe. And so from then on, Constantine was Christian. At that point, Christians were kind of untouchable as far as persecutability status.
We've invented a new word on the show.
Okay, thanks.
Persecutability.
I think that is actually a word, but we'll find out. Anyways, and so at that point, Christianity was recognized, and they weren't really going to have to worry about getting persecuted for their beliefs.
He made it the national religion, didn't he?
No, that actually came later.
Oh.
Christianity became the national religion under Theodosius I.
Okay. Was he Constantine's successor?
I'm not entirely sure. It happened about... Let's see. Words are really hard right now. It came about 80 years after Constantine, roughly. So it may or may not have been a successor, or there may have been a couple emperors in between. I don't know for certain one way or another.
Okay. So someone makes it. No, Theodosius the second. The first makes it the national religion. So then after that, we have Christianity spreading to Europe, because as we know, Christianity is the dominant religion in Europe and was fundamental in European culture. Yes. And so the way that happened, from what I understand, is you have Charles the Hammer Martel. Mm-hmm. The Hammer was his nickname,
yeah,
obviously.
I know.
It's like when people say, "Oh, man, Slaughter is my middle name,"
or it's. Yeah, actually, I knew a guy whose last name was Slaughter, but that's besides the point.
But moving on, so he's nicknamed the Hammer because he unified Francia, which is France, right? Mm-hmm. And then he also handed the Muslims butts to them at the Battle of Tours. So the Muslims actually, I didn't know this for a while, the Muslims had a really big presence in Spain. Mm-hmm. Really big. And so they were threatening Christianity in Europe, right? And so Charles Martel might have been a Christian. He might have converted from Constantine's followers, spreading it through Europe. But for whatever reason, he's a Christian. He unifies all of Francia, and then he kicks out the Muslims. So now Francia is Christian, right? Next up, you have his son, whose name is Pippin, actually. I found that funny. So Pippin doesn't really do a whole lot of noteworthy stuff that I'm going to cover. But then his son, so Charles Martel's grandson, Charlemagne, all right, he establishes the Carolingian Empire. And so what happens with Charlemagne is, well, Charles Martel unifies France. Mm-hmm. So this is how Christianity spreads to Europe. So Charles Martel unifies France. Charlemagne expands France. So he starts taking over Saxony, Germany, Croatia, Spain, right? He's taking over Italy, all these countries. He takes them over. And you know how he converts his subjugated people to Christianity? So what he does is he takes lots of prisoners, and this was especially the case in Saxony, all right? And he started systematically, one by one, killing the prisoners until the king would convert. And when it came to Saxony, he killed over 4,000 prisoners before the king converted to Christianity.
Just goes to show that sometimes people will take one part of whatever it is that they believe way too far and ignore another part of it. Because...
Right.
Well, part of Christianity is you're supposed to spread it to everyone, so that way then everybody can be saved, right? But then there's instances in which people take that part of it and they go far beyond what they ought to because they are pursuing that. So rather than going with Jesus' theory of love thy neighbor as they love thyself, he went with the I need to spread it to everybody so that way they can be my neighbor. And so that's a fundamental thing that you have to consider whenever you're talking about religions during this time, is that people did not always view people who were different from them as actually people.
But for sure. And we can debate on why people follow religion until we're blue in the face, but what we're focusing on here is just what happened, right? Okay, is it time for the cigar swap?
Yeah.
So Patrick, tell me about your what was yours called again?
The Big Betty.
Big Betty.
Big Bottom Betty.
Patrick is he has this talent for just getting long ashes going. Like, look at the size of this thing compared to mine. Mine's I already ashed mine once.
So this one, I'm gonna let Jesse try it first, and then I'll comment on it.
So I'm getting coffee off of that, a little bit of cocoa, maybe some hazel. This is a really good stick. It's like full body, but it's also really sweet.
Yes, that's one of the things I'm noticing about both of these. I think that mine's a little bit more bitter on the draw, but then whenever you lick your lips, it's very sweet. Mm-hmm. His seems to be a lot less. It seems to be a lot lighter. Like, not a lot lighter, but definitely lighter, and it's definitely still got the sweet wrapper.
What kind of flavor notes are you getting off of the rosewood? You want to try again?
Yeah.
All right, I'll take a look at my notes again while you're trying. Try not to ruin your ash.
I think it might be a little bit woody, I think.
Yeah, I'm getting that.
Yeah. Like, it's like, if I were to compare, this would be more of like a very dark oak wood, or maybe very dark oak wood, whereas that one I would think that's more of like a pine. something like that.
So you are such a cigar snob. I can't tell the difference between woods.
Well,
you can.
Well, I'm trying because like this one's definitely a lot darker, but that one's a lot lighter, and so I'm trying to explain what the difference in the taste is from my perspective.
Right.
I am by no means a total snob when it comes to cigars. These are actually some of these are some of the nicer sticks.
You're so humble. So anyways, Charlemagne, right, establishes the Carolingian Empire, which is essentially Christendom. You have all of Europe is now Christian, except for parts of Spain, which will become Christian at the Battle of Lepanto, but that's in like 1500 AD, so we're fast-forwarding way past where we are. So he establishes the Carolingian Empire, and actually, Charlemagne established education, and he really increased the literacy rate of Europe because he wanted to make sure everyone could read the Bible. So mandatory education was something that Charlemagne brought, and then stability and Christianity to the region. So moving on from Charlemagne, we have something called the Great Schism.
Before we get to that, there is one other part that I want to touch on really quick.
Please.
Charlemagne's influence had a major impact on Saxony because, like, by that point, everybody there became Christian because they had to, but they really took to it. So, in instances like Alfred the Great, other historians might know about him a little bit, or if you watch Netflix, then...
He's a Viking, isn't he?
No, Alfred the Great is a Saxon king. He's the king of Wessex. He inherited the rule from his brother. I believe his brother's name was Ethelred.
Yeah.
And so, if anyone who's watching this watched The Last Kingdom, you'll notice they actually focus on him in the show. It's not entirely historically accurate. They just use a lot of names that are actually... They were real people. Most of the people in the show were actually real people. They just kind of portray them in a little bit different way. Can you
reiterate again what Alfred the Great had to do with Charlemagne?
No. Well, he didn't have anything to do with Charlemagne in particular, but I want to explain his impacts were much more long-lasting than what his life was. And so, Alfred the Great, he was the sole Saxon... Wessex was the sole Saxon kingdom to not be conquered by the Danes at any point. Like, it was within inches of being conquered for an extended period of time, because Alfred the Great was, his kingdom was taken over by the Vikings, but he took it back. And so
Alfred spread Christianity to England, is what you're saying.
No, it had already spread to England. He was the one who kept England from becoming entirely Daneland.
Entirely pagan, right?
Yes, but one of the things about the Vikings was that they weren't necessarily trying to spread their religion, they were just trying to conquer.
Okay,
and so
gotcha.
Alfred was a big reason why, A, we have England as it is today, and B, why it is that they still had Christendom or Christianity as a prevalent factor within the government itself.
Right, okay.
So, that's just a little side note that I think is interesting.
No, that definitely is interesting. That's how we get Christianity up in the British Isles. And, well, the Church of England comes later. That's Henry VIII. Well, that's important for later.
Get to him in a minute.
So, the Great Schism. It's funny, like... I had this friend group one time, and we had some disagreements in the friend group, and we ended up breaking apart. And I ranted to my brother. I was like, "I've just had a great schism in my friend group," you know. So the Great Schism was pretty much the same exact thing. You've got 5 bishops. They all think they're number one, right?
I thought that it was 3.
So you have Constantinople, Antioch, and Rome, right? But then you also have Cairo and. No, I'm sorry. Alexandria. The ash finally fell.
Ash finally fell.
So you've got these Christian cities. I'm sure that there's 3 like more prominent than like Alexandria and Cairo. Mm-hmm. Like Antioch, Constantinople, and Rome were much more prevalent. But so anyways, you have all these bishops, and they think each one of them thinks that they're number one, right?
Well, it was like one of them was elected, but then he turned out to not be so great, and so they're like, no, we'll just make this guy the pope. And then it was like, okay, well now he's not now they're fighting, and so we'll just pick a new guy to be the pope. And so they had 3 popes going at it at the same time, and at that point, Christianity is kind of like, oh, okay, this is not how that's supposed to work. We're supposed to have one guy as our figurehead, and he's supposed to be the sole person that, communicates and talks to God.
So not only that, but they have ideological differences between East and West Christianity, or East and West Rome, right? So, and the differences are, according to my notes, bishops confirming people, like how much they can do that. Also, clerical celibacy. So the Orthodox or the East Christians don't believe in clerical celibacy, or that priests and clergy can marry in Eastern Christianity, but they cannot in Western Christianity. And then also the biggest one, whether or not you can use leavened bread for communion. Imagine they get in such an argument. You can't use leavened bread. Okay. That's heresy.
Okay, we see.
I'm leaving.
We see the same. We see something similar happen later on with the Protestant Reformation, which again I'm jumping.
Oh my
ahead.
goodness! People will go to war over the pettiest stuff. You ever hear about the War of Jacob's Ear?
Yes, I have heard of it. I don't remember it very well, but I have heard of it.
Human nature, man. That's all it is. But anyway, so
we'll get back to the Protestant Reformation in a minute.
Back on topic.
But they did actually have some serious things that they were talking about. It wasn't exclusively about.
I kid, but that's true. People go to war over the stupidest things, right? So, anyways, the Great Schism happens. So now we have East and West Christianity. So we have Orthodox and Catholic.
Yes.
Right, in the schism. And then, all right, so moving on from the schism, the next thing that happens is something that everybody's familiar with, all right? There were 5, debatably 8 of them, although 5 major ones, all right? And these things are called the Crusades, all right? And so here's one thing I'm actually very interested about, Patrick. Before we delve into the Crusades, which there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know about the Crusades, and in doing research for the episode, I'm like, wow, that happened, But why would Eastern Christians help Western Christians? Because they worked together, right?
Yes, they did. So one of the reasons was because, if I remember it correctly, the Eastern Emperor at the time, so the one who was in Constantinople, because West Rome had fallen a long time ago, but at this point, the Eastern Roman Empire, which was the Byzantine Empire, they had stuck around for much longer. Why that was is debatable. Largely, in my opinion, it was because the Roman one had just overextended itself, and so they let weaker people get in charge, and then all of a sudden, it just fell apart.
Okay.
But point is that the Eastern Roman Emperor, or the Byzantine Emperor, he goes to the Pope, and it's like, hey, I'm being attacked by Muslims at the time. And this was right whenever Christian kingdoms started to develop the ability to go on long, drawn-out campaigns. Because this would not have been possible unless they were able to do that. So this was one of the earliest times in history in which these Christian kingdoms, I'm using that term broadly for lack of a better one, but these, quote, Christian kingdoms...
they're all different, right?
Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to keep it as open-ended as possible, because you got like the Germans. It was technically an empire, but it was also mostly just a bunch of disunified states. And then you've got like the England that was a kingdom. Okay. Point being, you've got these Christian kingdoms,
right?
And so they're all like holy, and so. Excuse me. They're finally able to go to war on a large scale.
So the threat of Islam is what brought all these Christians together, is what you're saying. I get that. It's like,
and so the Pope goes to them, and he's.
Can I make an analogy real quick? It's like you'll fight with your brothers all day, right? But then as soon as someone else comes and starts messing with your brother, you're like, you can't do that, right?
Only I get to do that.
Well, yeah. So I guess that makes a lot of sense.